Guess that will do for the stealth generators, but I still don't want to be visiting real space anytime soon until I can run further simulations. Seems appropriate for this Legion, actually. Hidden away from sight, using stealth, approaching from an unexpected front. Perhaps their reputation of striking from the shadows is not as renowned as some who would turn on the Emperor, but this Legion stood loyal when the heresy was revealed, and they paid dearly for it, only surviving by some very desperate measures. One of the smallest of the Legion Astartes, drawn from the moon of a toxic forge world, its Primarch was both a renowned strategist and profound thinker who would be haunted by his deeds until his last known appearance. His name was Corvus Corax, sometimes known as the Raven Lord, and his sons formed the 19th Legion Astartes from the moon of deliverance over the forge world Kievar. They are the Raven Guard, and this is their story. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Legions, a 40k Stories mini-series. The 19th Legion Astartes were formed during the Unification Wars, seemingly from technologically minded tribals of the desert regions of Asia, from the gene seed of the Primarch Corvus Corax. They were deployed to liberate much of Central or Northern Asia, including ancient Russia, from a mighty warlord whose armor was kept in the Imperial Palace right up to the Horus Heresy. They then joined in the reconquest of the Sol system, taking back Jupiter's moon Lycidia despite heavy losses, but spent most of their pre-Corax days in the shadow of the Lunar Wolves. They were highly respected and valued by Horus, but being seconded to the 16th Legion meant the 19th didn't see as much action as they could have done had they crusaded alone. It would probably therefore be fair to assume that they saw action in some of Horus's first few battles, but we cannot confirm if the 19th were deployed on their own without the Lunar Wolves until they found their Primarch. If this is true, however, then it would mean that they never fought on their own for several decades, so I suspect that some of their battles were done solo, at the very least. An account made by a veteran around the time of the Dropsite Massacre refers to tough landings on worlds such as Lux Majoris, but this could have still been with the Primarch at their head, and we'll likely never know either way. We do know a little of their methods and how they were used in these initial times, however. They were a covert ops force, capable of striking incredibly quickly and effectively from the shadows, but they were also used to put down insurgencies that would arise after compliance was achieved. One of their leaders in this time was Arcus Fowl, also known as the Shade Lord, who was the commander of the 19th for about 30 years immediately before the rediscovery of Corax. Unlike Marius Gage in the Ultramarines, however, Arcus Fowl was removed from all command and authority following the integration of the Raven Lord, before being seemingly exiled with another cohort of legionaries. There is rumour he would go on to found the Carcharodins chapter after the heresy, as their leader used the title of Shade Lord and no one else is known to have gone by it, but this is unfortunately unsubstantiated beyond this coincidental evidence. Eventually, about a century after it began, the Great Crusade discovered its 18th Primarch, the second last of the known ones to be found, Corvus Corax. Corvus Corax did not land anywhere when he was scattered by the Chaos Gods along with the other Primarchs. Instead, he materialized inside the moon Lycaeus within some sort of chamber. He was lucky to be found, and he would likely not have been if there had not been a mineral seam being mined near to his arrival, but the slaves who found him did not turn him into their masters. He matured quickly, as was typical for a Primarch, and this only reinforced the notion that he was a saviour for the slaves who named him. The name Corax means saviour or deliverer in their tongue. Corax vowed to free them from the tyrants who ruled Lycaeus, and during his time planning this liberation, he learned the art of stealth, as the slaves were insistent on avoiding overt confrontation. Whilst he was of course sneaky anyway, he seemingly had a measure of psychic capabilities, as he could seemingly become invisible, after a fashion. It is said that he was able to will others not to see him, as opposed to literally turning invisible. It is worth pointing out, however, that despite his probable psychic abilities, Corax was in favour of censuring Magnus the Red at the Council of Nicaea. That would come much later, and thus I think he's a hypocrite. As time passed on Lycaeus, he began to set up his rebellion quietly, and when he reached maturity, he began the uprising. Much like his legion, he only revealed his hand when the metaphorical and literal knife was already at the throat of his foe, starting with psychological warfare before all-out battle that culminated in a mass breakout from the prison that held the slaves. With Lycaeus taken, the rulers of its planet Kievar attempted to reclaim their prize, but Corax was ready. Ambushes were commonplace, but the defining blows were struck when Corax sent atomic mining charges to each of the 5 major cities of Kievar. Yeah, He nuked 5 cities at once, causing their rulers to turn on each other in a struggle for resources and power. It was around this time that the Emperor arrived, and though the two spoke at length about what is unknown, Corax did not join up with the Great Crusade at once. His supposed condition for signing up was peace on Kievar, which the Lord of Mankind left to his son to oversee, and the Mechanicum stepped in afterwards to help rebuild from the wreckage. Lycaeus was renamed Deliverance by its inhabitants, and on the surface of the moon, the vast black tower that had once been the home of the prison guards was converted. This would become the fortress monastery of the 19th Legion, known as the Raven Spire, and at one point it contained a torture floor known as the Red Level that could even kill an Astartes, though Corax would eventually ban its use. It is unknown exactly how long this process took, but finally Legion and Primarch were reunited, and the Raven Guard were taken to the battlefields of the Great Crusade. Early on in the Raven Guard's history, a quiet restructuring took place. Corax saw the Legion as oppressors similar to the slavers on Lycaeus in some ways, assumedly the whole putting down insurgencies thing, and as a result the old traditions of the tribes of Terra were practically obliterated. In their place, the stealth and guile both Corax and his sons were already known for were enhanced, and a series of mantras and doctrines would form the new 19th Legion. Unique vehicles were also commissioned by the Forge World that Kievar became, including a unique Thunderhawk variant known as the Shadowhawk, and the unit that would become the Moritat, individual and near suicidal assassins, was also implemented by Corax, and would actually outfox Guilliman's legendary combat simulations for about 3 goes until the Lord of Ultramar worked it out. Not everyone went fully along with it, clinging to the old ways in one manner or another, as perhaps evidenced in the compliance of Indra Sul. Originally planned as an infiltration led by Corax and the best of Deliverance, in the end it fell to the loud Terran contingent and their big scary guns to carry the day against the mind-eating Crave. One could possibly even accuse Corax of racism, to some extent, as he was known to distrust the Terrans in favour of warriors from Deliverance, and this would boil over in the Battle of Gate 42. Horus, now promoted to War Master, ordered the Raven Guard to launch a direct attack against rebels in the Akum Sothos cluster, something Corax initially argued against due to it not suiting his legion's way of war. Perturabo, however, accused Corax of cowardice, and it took the intervention of Leman Russ to stop the two Primarchs fighting one another, though arguably he did support the Lord of Iron in his opinion. Not the whole cowardice thing, but it was the move that had been asked to be made, so anyway. Perhaps out of spite, Corax sent the Terran contingent who were most in favour of Horus' strategy to lead the assault, which became the darkest day for the Legion in the Crusade era, as the 19th were left only 80,000 strong in the aftermath. That sounds like a lot, but by the terms of the Legions, that's pretty damn small. However, this had a hidden upside for the Raven Guard, as the warrior lodge hidden within the Legion was majoritively made up of Terrans who had served under Horus in the pre-Corax days, and so when the Horus Heresy was eventually revealed, there would be no major schisms amongst the sons of Corax. In response to Gate 42, Corax swore he would never serve under Horus again, and began to exile the Terran survivors into far-flung, forgotten campaigns without support, supposedly wanting the Raven Guard to remain pure. Yeah, sure thing, Corax. The 19th were also given the honour of mass field testing the Mark VI power armour, provisionally known as Mark V at the time, in the Scalland campaign not long after Gate 42. It is said that Perturabo and others wished for this to be the death of this design, as it was less frontally armoured than earlier Marks, but the Raven Guard used it incredibly effectively to conduct guerrilla war against Eldar, a force renowned for being incredibly tricksy and deviant in itself. In fact, that they were so successful that the Mark VI became known as Corvus armour in the Raven Lord's honour. The final known conquest of the Raven Guard was the original compliance of Istvan III and presumably the entire Istvan system in 994 M30. It was an incredibly difficult final fight with over 800 companies being committed to the conquest, but it took a bombardment of the Choral City to finally force the Istvanians to surrender. Funny how this would of course not be the last time that said city was bombed to absolute hell. Hey. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given Corax's hatred of Horus and the lack of a warrior lodge, the Raven Guard stood loyal when the Horus Heresy broke out. Almost the entire Legion, still comparatively small compared to many others, was deployed to Istvan V in the first wave along with the Salamanders and Iron Hands, and would of course be ensnared in the now infamous Dropsite Massacre. The battles in the first phase were seemingly against the World Eaters for the most part, and in the second phase, the Raven Guard mainly clashed with Sons of Horus, Night Lords, and Wordbearers. Corax duelled Lorgar and would have in fact slain the Arisen if not for the intervention of Conrad Kurz, but he had his signature weapon shattered by the Night Haunter. In the aftermath of the massacre, the World Eaters pursued the surviving Raven Guard, but manipulations of the Alpha Legion and then Angron and his sons never got to Corax and co. Some Raven Guard joined other shattered legionaries, remnants of those who fled Istvan V, but Corax was not among them, as he and around 3,000 Astartes were rescued by a lone battle barge and returned to Deliverance. On the way, they visited Terra as Corax sought a way to rebuild his legion, and he was granted this by a vision from the Emperor himself. He then travelled to Luna, navigating the moon to recover the gene-forging technology that had been used to create the Astartes in the first place, along with the common genome of all the Primarchs, before returning to his home world to begin the rebuilding process. It was a great success initially, with the new warriors known as Raptors capable of defeating even veteran traitors, but the Alpha Legion were working in secret on Kievar, led by the twin Primarch Omegon. Using a rebellion of the tech guilds as cover, the 20th Legion were able to infiltrate the gene labs, spiking the new material with a demonic poison that would corrupt and deform any new Raptors. They also intended to steal the technology from Deliverance and destroy all remaining Raven Guard gene seed, and actually achieve the former objective, but not the latter. Even this did not keep the Raven Guard down though, and once they had dealt with the infiltrators and insurrection, they were back on campaign. Even the mutated Raptors were committed, forming strike teams alongside their older brethren in lightning raids against enemy weak points. This included seizing the Perfect Fortress, constructed by the Emperor's children on the planet of Narcissus and said to be impenetrable. Never mind, Fulgrim, you tried. Also, planet called Narcissus, narcissism much? Eventually, however, the remainder of the Legion was gathered for what was originally to be Corax's last stand, the Battle of Yarant. The Space Wolves were on the verge of destruction on Yarant 3, and even the mighty Leman Russ had been incapacitated, and so the 19th came to reinforce. With the Astartes Bjorn, yes, that one, in command of the Wolves, the Loyalist forces did a lot of damage, and eventually Corax, the Raptors, and some of the Wolves prepared for their last charge while the rest evacuated. Corax fully intended to die against the traitors that day, who were led by the Sons of Horus' first captain Abaddon. But on seeing the Eye of Horus on their banner, he changed his mind. He realized it was not his place to choose when and where he would die. That was the sort of arrogance that had led Horus to rebel in the first place. And so, rather than martyr himself, and despite the great gains their charge had already made, Corax convinced Bjorn to withdraw fully from Yarant, before taking the surviving Raven Guard back into the shadows to continue the war on the traitors. The Raven Guard were not present for the Battle of Terra, assumedly as they'd been behind traitor lines throughout much of the heresy, and so they couldn't make it. In the aftermath, only 3,000 or 4,000 Astartes were available for duty, not counting the deformed Raptors who had survived Yarant. I'll explain why soon. Corax agreed to divide his legion in accordance with the Codex Astartes, knowing that Guilliman's reasoning and vision was sound, and neither 2 or 3 successors were sired in the second founding. The Blackguard, the Revilers, and debatably the Raptors. Some say they were sired later, along with of course the remaining Raven Guard chapter. With this done, Corax turned to more private affairs, dealing with his mutated sons. It is said that it took many hours for him to reach a decision, but eventually the Primarch chose to kill all of the mutated Raptors personally. Some would argue that this was cruel, but it is known that the survivors of Yarant wished for their misery to be ended in that last stand, and so it was much an act of mercy as anything else. After the Raptors had been slain, Corax retreated to the Raven Spire and locked himself away, supposedly racked with guilt and praying for the Emperor's mercy. Suppose he bought into the whole God Emperor idea faster than some others, I suppose. No one knows if he got what he wanted, because a year exactly after locking himself away, Corax emerged. Whether anyone asked after him at this point is unclear, for all that is confirmed is that Corax took a ship, alone, on a course toward the Eye of Terror, leaving behind the message, nevermore. He has never been seen or heard from again, and it is my opinion that he went to martyr himself in an attempt to absolve his guilt, but it is possible that he still lives to this day, being a Primarch and all that. The Raven Guard themselves still honour the tenets and ideals of Corvus Corax, striking from unseen quarters to win many battles, often relying heavily on their scouts and assault marines. They have now sired a total of 14 successes, including the entirely albino Death Spectres. All Raven Guard gene seed can cause paling of the skin, but not to the same extent as the Death Spectres. They would likely have sired many more, but their gene seed has massively degenerated since M32, forcing them to use Terran stocks for resupply and keeping them perpetually low on numbers. They were, until very recently, led by Chapter Master Corvin Severax until his recent death against the Tau under Commander Shadowsun, but now it is Kavan Shrike, Master of Shadows, who leads the Raven Guard. And so, with the tale of the 19th Legion told, let us now explore a few famous sons of Corvus Corax. After the Dropsite Massacre, Corax drastically restructured the Raven Guard. Rather than mix elements of companies, every individual company was dedicated to a specific role. Tactical companies, and presumably any heavy support infantry ones, were known as Talons. The assault companies were the Falcons, and the light vehicles/air support became the Hawks. The newly created Raptors were also added after the return to Deliverance, and each of these four groups had an overall commander. The brothers Bran and Agapito Nev, both natives of Deliverance, led the Raptors and Talons respectively. Bran was the one who led the battle barge Avenger to rescue Corax and the Raven Guard from Istvan V, having been warned of the Legion being in peril by dreams haunting the leader of the Therian Cohort, the Imperial Army regiment assigned to the Raven Guard, who in fact brought Istvan V to compliance the first time around. Despite being left on the ship when Corax visited Terra, Bran was made Master of Recruits, overseer of new recruits to the Legion, and it was he who suggested the name of Raptors for the new Astartes before being given command of them. Agapito, on the other hand, has very little known information until this period, when he was given overall command of the Talons. It is stated he went to Istvan V and that he was already a commander at the time, but his actions before and during the Dropsite Massacre are in fact unknown. What is known, however, is that the two brothers were both involved in the Battle of Ravendelve, the infiltration and sabotage attempt of the Alpha Legion, with Bran supposedly in command. Despite Corax's presence, I suspect there may be some missing information there. Agapito played a critical role in unmasking the Alpha Legionaries, who had attempted to mask their presence by taking on the appearance of Raven Guard Astartes, by noting their odd behaviour and then leading their extermination. Both Nev brothers would take command roles in the Battle of Yarant, with Bran being one of those who begged Corax to abandon his suicidal charge. Given that the Raptors were to be sacrificed along with the Primarch, I can see his logic on that one. The future of both these two after Yarant is unknown, for they are not stated as being killed during the heresy, but nor were they given any noteworthy role in the aftermath such as Chapter Master. As for the other forces, the Falcons were led by a Loni Tev, who by the name I assume to be of Deliverance, but I'm sad to report we know nothing of him besides his role. The Hawks actually had 2 or 3 commanders. Solaro An was in command on Istvan, and there are conflicting reports saying that he was either killed or not in the massacre, but after his eventual death, Nuran Tesk was given command. He then also died, though when, where and how is unclear, and it fell to a Terran, Sukunu, to lead the Hawks. I may have mispronounced that, I apologise. He would have a longer time in command than his predecessor, surviving to and past the Battle of Yarant, also pleading with Corax to call off his martyrdom, just like Bran. Nikona Sharokin was an incredibly talented Astartes, having inherited the ability to Wraith Slip from Corax. This was not actually a psychic ability, certainly not for those who weren't the Primarch anyway, and it allowed the Marine in question to conceal themselves using their surroundings and other techniques. Those who possessed this trait were formed into units known as Mordathan, elite infiltrators drawn from the original rebels on Lycaeus that were granted ascension with the Emperor's personal approval. This makes Sharokin many decades old by the time of the heresy, and thus a veteran within the Legion. Well, probably anyway. Sharokin was badly wounded during the Dropsite Massacre, and was later rescued by the Iron Hand Sabik Wayland before joining up with the remnants of the 10th Legion. Stationed, sort of, aboard the heavily modified strike cruiser Sisypheum, Sharokin was part of the team to recover the Kryptos, a device which seemingly permitted the decoding of traitor communications. He and Wayland were then deployed to the world of Hydra Caudatus to intercept Forgrim and Perturabo, and Sharokin was able to land a headshot on the Emperor's Children's Primarch with his sniper rifle. Thorgrim of course survived, seemingly thanks to the administrations of Fabius Bile, but the crew of the Sisyphean were not content with this and pursued the 3rd and 4th legions to the Eldar world Idris, home of the Angel Exterminatus. Here, Sharakin would cross blades twice with the swordsman Lucius. Their first duel came aboard the strike cruiser itself, as the supposedly highest-ranking Iron Father to survive Istvan accidentally compromised the ship, but Sharakin was able to see off one of the greatest swordsmen in the Emperor's children, landing a strike on his face before they were separated by the tide of battle. Down on the planet itself, the two would meet again as the Mordathans sought out Lucius, and this time they would have their final meeting, or at least under normal circumstances. Sharakin defeated Lucius again, stabbing his twin blades through the swordsman before impaling his collarbone and telling him that he took no pleasure in the act. Of course, Lucius would be resurrected by cheating, and now that condition of "I took no pleasure in killing you" is the condition of how you actually kill Lucius. What became of Sharakin after the battle that saw Thorgrim ascended to demonhood is unknown, but it is known that the Sisyphean would fight again under Shadrach Medusan, though in fact this was Alpharius in disguise which forced the Iron Hand ship to flee. If he escaped from Idris, then Sharakin will have been amongst the crew throughout the heresy, and I would like to think he was returned to the Raven Guard someday because, he was a badass. He deserves some credit. Following the Council of Nicaea, the Raven Guard disbanded its librarians like every other legion did. Well, some of them may not have done, but officially it did anyway. However, after Istvan V, Corax took the decision to reinstate the librarius, which runs counter to his desire to censure Magnus, though it's not saying he had an opinion on Psychers at the time, so probably just sound tactical logic. The new chief librarian was named as Balsar Kurthuri, as one assumes his predecessor had died at some point between Nicaea and the return to Deliverance. Kurthuri's actions in the heresy as chief librarian are sadly undocumented, but he served in the role all the way up to Yarant, or just before it at any rate. Having received a psychic warning from a fellow librarian that the wolves were in trouble on Yarant, and a physical one regarding a cruiser being attacked by word-bearers, Kurthuri told Corax of Russ's son's plight, and Agapito Nev was dispatched to rescue the cruiser before the whole legion moved on Yarant. Strangely, however, the librarius would not join them. Corax had, for reasons unknown, become suddenly extremely distrusting of Psychers, and so disbanded the librarius and ordered its members to travel to Terra. Kurthuri talked the Primarch around, after a fashion, and though the librarius was still disbanded, its members could stay, fighting as ordinary Brattle brothers just as before Istvan. This did not apply, however, to the now former chief librarian, as Kurthuri was exiled to Terra and to the mercy of Malgador the Sigillite. He was either accompanied by or joined up with Imperial Fists and Custodes during the trip, but when he arrived he was forced to flee as the Custodians were ordered by their kin to kill the librarian. The Custodes captain Arcatus, who had been with the Raven Guard since the return to Terra after Istvan, killed the Fists but spared Kurthuri after the Psyker refused to use his abilities against him. Arcatus then presented Kurthuri to Malgador, and he was inducted into the Knights Errant by Eumogen, former chief librarian of the Salamanders and a fellow knight. This potentially chalks off 2 more founders of the Grey Knights, though I will have to wait until our journey concludes before I can say for sure. With Rubio, Zarost, and potentially Severian, it may that we have too many before too long. 2 other Raven Guard would in fact become Knights Errant along with their chief librarian. Of course, I should point out we know nothing of what actually happened to Kurthuri, otherwise I would have mentioned it. Dravian Clade was a Tech Marine in training, but he was interrupted by the Battle of Mars and was then returned to the Red Planet as a knight. Unfortunately, it's believed he died on Mars, but it sounds like he went out swinging. The final Raven Guard Knight Errant was Rama Karayan, who had seemingly a decent friendship with the White Scar Alton Nohai, probably only struck up after they became knights, as the 5th and 19th are never stated as working together. However, Karayan would be killed during the raid on the Vengeful Spirit by Grail Noctua, one of the Heresy-era Mornival of the Sons of Horus, who would later be possessed by the demon Tormageddon. As has become something of a trend with the recent legions we've covered, I can't find any more Raven Guard with enough of a detailed story to cover in full, so we'll have a little miscellaneous section, for want of a better word. I actually quite enjoy these. Take, for example, Gerith Arendi, a Terran who led the Shadow Wardens, Corax's honor guard. This formation was initially mistrusted by the Primarch, but after distinguishing themselves in the final battle for Lycaeus, they were adopted into the Legion and served with distinction. They were stealth experts all, though it is unknown if they had the ability to wraith slip like Sharakin and the Mordathan, and I suspect that those out of the know would never even know Corax was under constant guard. They were that good. Arendi himself supposedly died on Istvan V, but he had in fact used the salamanders and iron hands as bait to make his escape, a fact he undoubtedly struggled with for the rest of his days. He would go on to become chapter master of the Black Guard after the heresy, as that chapter was formed from the remnants of the Shadow Wardens, but we don't know what became of him after that, or pretty much anything of his descendants for that matter. There was also Navar Hef, a mutated raptor who was a lieutenant amongst these cursed brothers. Despite his natural claws rather than actual lightning claws, and attempted martyrdoms during the heresy, he was a devout servant of Corax, even going so far as to massacre a group of space wolves sent to monitor the Raven Guard by Malcador. Looks like all the loyalists were under the sigillite scrutiny, as we saw the wolves were also dispatched to watch the Blood Angels in Cygnus, and suffered the same fate. Nasir Amit. He was part of the last charge on Yarant, bemoaning his continued existence when Corax called off the attack, and assumedly the Raven Lord did kill him once the heresy was done, along with the remaining raptors. Finally, we have Alastor Rushal, perhaps the only known traitor Raven Guard of the time. He was either captured or defected on Istvan, primarily by the Night Lords, and had his tongue removed before taking a place on the Chiroptera. Chiroptera? Not sure. A sort of council of captains within the 8th Legion that led the Night Lords whilst Kurz was incapacitated. Rushal had no warriors to lead, but he was a close ally of Sevatar, which undoubtedly helped his cause. His fate, like many of Sevatar's Chiroptera, is unknown, as they were all ordered to scatter when the Dark Angels attacked the Night Lords and Kurz reawakened. But as Rushal led no forces of his own, it is unlikely he had any further role to play in the galaxy at large. So end the tales of the Raven Guard Legion. The sons of Corvus Corax were all incredibly skilled and dedicated warriors, showing incredible resolve to survive despite all the adversity they faced in both the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Whilst the 19th is certainly not the most renowned of legions preferring to work in the dark, their contributions to the Imperium cannot be overlooked in both ancient and modern history. Were Corax to return, I do not doubt that he would be proud of all that his sons and successors have achieved, even if the Primarch himself will wrestle with his inner demons until the end of his days. I almost wish I'd been able to see the Raven Spire for myself, but without these damn generators at optimal efficiency, I daren't risk it. Still, I think they're where they need to be, and so our journey continues. We're now halfway through our Legions mini-series, and with 9 more to visit, there are still plenty of stories to be told along the way, and I hope you'll join me for all of them. Our next stop is much quieter than a chapter homeworld, so should be a good test of the systems, but on my way, I think we'll talk about some of the greatest creations of the Dark Mechanicum, the horrific yet glorious fusions of machine and demon, the Demon Engines. Thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.